Good evening, everyone. We're just waiting for Commissioner Irani to come. I just wanted to get on right now and say hello. So you're in the right place. We will start shortly. Thank you. I'm just going to wait one more minute, but I also
just popped in.
Okay, our attendees list are also popping up, so sounds great.
Yeah, I was having some issues getting into the meeting for whatever reason.
As you know, I have those all the time, so.
Yeah.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. It is 7:03 and I call this meeting of ANC 1C's Planning, Zoning, and Transportation Committee meeting to order. Good evening, I'm Zach Gold, chair of the committee. I'm also commissioner for SMD 1C05. We have a large audience tonight, so before we begin, just a quick non-PZT announcement, and that is to pre-register to get vaccinated. I am putting a link in the chat for those who do not have computers or are not able to see the chat. The phone number is 855-363-0333. DC is now asking everyone whether you're currently eligible or not to register to be vaccinated. If you are currently eligible and you are pre-registered by before midnight tonight, you will be part of tomorrow's 10 a.m. random selection for vaccine appointments. So I registered this afternoon. It took 4 minutes. I recommend it. With that, let's get started on today's meeting. We have 2 items on our agenda. The first is a discussion of Councilmember Nadeau's proposed future land use map, that's FLUM, recommendations to the comprehensive plan. And the second item is a discussion of potential tree plantings in public space in what's known as BB&T Plaza or the northeast corner of 18th and Columbia. So the FLUM matter, tonight's ANC 1C PZT meeting, we're allocating time to provide a venue for community discussion on Councilmember Nadeau's proposed amendments to the FLUM. As an introduction, the FLUM is not a zoning map. The FLUM lays out the maximum future use of a piece of land, and these proposed amendments do not change the current zoning map, but instead consider the future of our neighborhood, a neighborhood which is both dense and requires more housing. A couple points of clarification as we get started. First is that our agenda noted that this would be a discussion, but there seems to have been some confusion about whether the ANC is taking a position. And so while I appreciate all the neighbors who have written and said, vote this way or that way, there is no vote being taken this evening. And there's no vote that the ANC is considering. Second, I know that we previously posted a map and explanation on the agenda for tonight. And again, thank you to the members who wrote me, wrote other commissioners, and wrote Councilmember Nadeau about this issue. This venue is working by design, and based on your feedback, those maps and proposals have already been changed. We have posted the updated maps on our agenda, and we'll also go through that this evening. I strongly encourage those community members and, of course, commissioners commenting to do so based on this updated map. Doing so will help move the conversation forward. Of course, if your comments were, "I like the old map. Why don't we just keep it that way?" I guess that's okay too. So we have from Councilmember Nadeau's office, David Meny. The floor is yours to present.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for those clarifications. We'll touch on some of those, but I think it's important to repeat that. Can everyone hear me okay? Just a nod is fine. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen and share the presentation. This should be what is posted accompanying the agenda. So you can also follow along there if you'd like, or if you are on the phone. So let me make sure I am presenting here. Oh, I shared the wrong thing. There we go. Okay, everyone can see that okay? I can't see faces, but yes, okay. So thank you. As Commissioner Gold introduced this, this is going over basically our deliberation process for recommended changes to the future land use map. So the council is currently considering the comprehensive plan, which is DC's essentially like master land use planning document. It guides decisions around zoning and land use in the district. We'll go into a little more detail on how the map specifically relates to both zoning and basically what you experience walking around. But just note that we are just talking about the map today, and there's a whole lot of text that accompanies this. So if there are any follow-up questions about what the council is doing as we're moving to markup and approving the text of the comprehensive plan, I'm happy to take questions or talk with folks in a separate venue. So just to open this up, to the right here is basically an excerpt of our baseline. So this is what ANC 1C looks like on the map right now, with the one exception of that outlined area in the bottom right corner is the one change that the Office of Planning proposed to the council, and we'll get into that in a little more detail. And you also see a legend to understand what this means, but that is what we're starting with here. So just some background to set the stage for why we're doing this. One of the council members' main goals is to ensure that we are producing the affordable housing, especially at the appropriate bedroom sizes to meet the needs of the district. I'm sure I don't have to tell folks that that is an essential priority. But we also want to make sure that that housing and that affordable housing is distributed as equitably as possible. This is work that's been done on the district level with the Housing Framework for Equity and Growth. That sets affordable housing targets for all of the areas of the city. But we also want to be mindful of that as we're looking within our own ward. So currently, when you look at the data, ANC 1C has the lowest percentage in the ward of affordable units as a percentage of the total housing units within that ANC. Let me say that again, just to make sure that's clear. As a percent of total units within the ANC, 1C has the lowest level of income restricted affordable housing. When you look at the changes that were proposed to the future land use map and that were submitted to the council, it's interesting because you almost see an inverse relationship between the distribution of affordable housing and generally how growth has been distributed in Ward 1 and the changes. So in 1B, where you have about 27% of the units as income restricted affordable, they still saw quite a few changes. Now we think those are reasonable and fully support them. But as I indicated in the first slide, 1C only had one outlined change from the Office of Planning. Now, when you compare that to the feedback that we got from both the ANC's resolution, from the comprehensive plan hearing that the council held last November, and conversations with constituents and all of the feedback that we've gotten, a significant amount of that was in support of greater density in Ward 1, was understanding that, density in the ward is a thing that everyone is familiar with, and making sure that we leverage the changes that we make here to support a greater share of affordable housing. So what we're looking at doing here, because of where we are in the process of amending the comprehensive plan, it is gone through a P, they've solicited feedback from ANCs, and now it's before the council, and we're moving towards markup. We want to try to add density in a context-sensitive way that's consistent with all of that feedback that we've gotten, in a way that also allows for greater leverage for the ANC to negotiate for more affordable housing, or to be able to use the tools that we already have that provide for that affordable housing. And also with an eye towards trying to distribute the impacts of growth across the ward in a bit of a more equitable way. So to talk really briefly about what the FLUM is, as the commissioner mentioned in the introduction, this is not a zoning map. And if you leave here with one thing, I think that is the most important thing here. While it has a relationship with the zoning map, DC is a bit unique in that the council does not vote on zoning. It doesn't vote on individual projects. And so what the future land use map is supposed to be is a general policy guideline to express future land use across the district. So basically the rule of thumb is that zoning should not be inconsistent with the comprehensive plan and should not be inconsistent with the future land use map. But when you look on the ground, that actually expresses itself in a lot of ways. So these are all examples pulled from just this ANC. And you can see that even places that are moderate density residential range from 2-story row house blocks, I believe that's Seton Place, to mid-rise apartment buildings along Columbia Road. This is notable, and we'll also get to this later, but there are a couple of places within 1C where it's designated as moderate density residential, but actually the historic buildings that are there exceed both that designation and the current zoning. So they wouldn't be allowed to be built today, essentially. But even when you look at the medium density residential areas within 1C, you also get a range of something like this, which is, I believe, Euclid Street, that most people would interpret as probably moderate density residential. A lot of similarity to this here. All the way up to, and I would say this is like emblematic of medium density on a corridor in 1C is like a building like Highland Park here, which actually matches the relative massing of a building like this over here. But they're two totally different designations on the future land use map. So that's just to illustrate that there is not a one-to-one relationship between zoning and this map. And the changes that we make here are far from changes that are made immediately on the ground. And we'll try to illustrate that as we move on as well. So I want to try and share basically an illustrative example of what this means in practice. Because I think there is sometimes not a lot of clarity as to what a change on the future land use map means. So I know there's a lot of arrows and shapes here, but I'm going to try to break this down. So scenario A here up top is basically, for this case study, the present day. So this could be, say, like a 1-story commercial building along Columbia Road or elsewhere in the ANC. So that's the black bar here. That is the existing building. Most of those kinds of structures in this ANC are zoned MU5A. So that's like a moderate density mixed use zone. So that allows for both commercial and residential. So it is true that even if you have a 1-story building in a lot of 1C, you can build some residential units on top of that. So that's what this yellow here is, yellow green. That is the potential zoning capacity. So, and the dotted line up here is the future land use map, which in this scenario is moderate density. The moderate density designation is consistent with that zoning, and so they more or less match up. The second scenario here is what would happen if we increase the future land use map. So as you can see, the building is the same. The zoning capacity is the same because, again, this is not a zoning map. But what this does do is creates a gap between that base zoning and the potential maximum allowed density under the future land use map. And another thing to take away from here in brief is that there is a lot that we can get out of creating that space. You often in land use policy and throughout the comprehensive plan have heard phrase like basically land value recapture, using excess land value and delivering that in the form of public benefits. So this, there are a couple of ways to do that, but creating that gap between zoning and the FLUM, or future land use map, is one way of creating that value that we can then recapture. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but this is sort of for illustrative purposes. So taking those two scenarios, there are a couple of things that are possible. I didn't want to stretch the arrow across here because it's a little bit confusing. Let me switch to a pointer here. But under both of these situations, obviously what is possible is nothing changes. It stays 1-story commercial, and there's no residential built on top of that. The zoning remains the same. That is true even if we would raise this to medium density. Under both situations, it can also just be built up to the zoning envelope. This is often referred to as by right construction because it is allowed by current zoning. And that's true even if we raise this to medium density on the future land use map. If there's no requested change to zoning or no negotiated change, then the zoning remains the same and the by right construction remains within that envelope. So you get about that amount of residential. The opportunity that this opens up is this third item here, which is that through a couple of different processes, it can then be built up to the maximum allowed density in the future land use map. So one option is a zoning map amendment. And I think I saw, in some of the conversations we had and the feedback we received, there may have been a bit of a misunderstanding about this new policy that was just passed called Expanded IZ or IZ Plus. But what that does is it takes what is currently the inclusionary zoning policy of 8 to 10% of units being affordable. That is true under this circumstance, and just about doubles that. But that is only true of projects that receive zoning map amendments. So upgrading from, say, this yellow zone here to this orange one here. So that is one possibility. The other that some are likely familiar with is a planned unit development. In effect, it can have the same effects in that it raises the property up to that new zone, but it allows for a little bit more flexibility as to what the community or public benefits are. And that's a negotiation process with the ANC and the developer and the community. So ideally, and this is of course what we would like to see, is that those also get a substantial amount of affordability, but public benefits can also include stuff like increased access to parking, landscaping, certain other details about the project. Councilmember Nadeau's amendments to the comprehensive plan emphasized that in planned unit developments, affordable housing should be the top priority in those negotiations, but I just want to make it clear that that is a process that happens between the various parties here. So that is all a big prelude to this, which is our slightly modified set of recommendations. in ANC 1C. And we are, in communication with the chairman's office about this, which is responsible for marking up the comprehensive plan over the coming weeks. So this was originally circulated, as the commissioner noted, we received a lot of good constructive feedback. We've made a couple of modifications that I'll walk through. I want to just leave this slide up here so people can take a look at it for a moment before I go into detail. And the legend is here. One thing that I really want to be clear on is that the recommendations here were made irrespective of any pending development. There were no meetings, no communications, no requests with private developers or other private parties. We wanted to do this out of good planning practice and in response to feedback that we received from constituents. So we want to make that point abundantly clear. So if I can walk through this, here is number one. I'm trying to move this out of my way here, sorry. Okay, so this is the north side of Columbia Road. So the recommendation here is to change it from the current designation, which is moderate density residential and low density commercial. And that carries along down 18th Street currently, to medium density residential and low density commercial. This actually, I think, is consistent with that illustrative example that I walked through earlier. You can look at a lot of the commercial or mixed use buildings along this north end of Columbia Road, and that example applies pretty well. And that middle scenario where a commercial building is built up to existing zoning is something we have a pretty good example for. It would be like the Admiral Heights building on Columbia Road, which is recent construction and within the moderate density designation. The reason why we didn't look at the south side of Columbia Road, and you can look at 14th Street in Columbia Heights for a similar example, is that there's also a relationship between the future land use map and lot sizes. Generally, you have smaller lots where you have historic density that is more consistent with the moderate density category on the south side of Columbia. So that's why we opted for just the north side here. The one modification that we made in this case is that, as you can see, the striping here means that it's a mix of uses. So originally, the proposal had been for medium density residential and I believe moderate or medium density commercial. I think it was moderate. But after some feedback and the desire to maintain the current mix of commercial uses within that corridor, we think it's fair to leave that as low density commercial. One thing that I would like to open up for discussion when we're done here is this portion that's boxed in red here. The original proposal didn't include that, but when you look at the current mix of uses, the current zoning, all of the factors we're considering here, there's really nothing that distinguishes that section of the north end of Columbia Road from the remainder of this. So I can zoom in on this later if it's helpful, but you see like some of the buildings up here and some down to the end of this stretch here, which was in that photo earlier, actually already exceed moderate density residential. That's also true for the buildings that abut Kalorama Park here. So really, it's many places of historic medium density residential with a couple of buildings in between that would be designated to match that. So number two is an area between Euclid, Mozart, 16th Street, and not quite up to Columbia Road. So as you'll see with pretty much all of these recommendations, I believe all of them, they're all on high capacity transit corridors, which is consistent with a district-wide policy of trying to enhance residential density along those. So that is true here. In this case, if you look at the current future land use map, there is sort of a space in what is otherwise a fairly consistent medium density designation along that 16th Street transit corridor. So this would be filling in that gap. For some buildings here, there are a couple of residential buildings that, while they're designated moderate density residential, actually already match a medium density. And there are a couple of lots in here that are unbuilt or underbuilt. A lot of this are owned by embassy properties. So we believe it's prudent and consistent with those values. At the same time, we acknowledge that there may not be considerable change here anytime soon. But as I mentioned, that's consistent with our philosophy here of trying to look at this agnostic to any pending development. So number 3 here, we also modified a bit based on some feedback and some conversations. So as with further up 16th Street, we want to try and maintain a consistent and higher density along our transit corridors, especially with projects like the 16th Street bus lane going in as we speak. So the modification here, we removed this southern component because besides the existing land use right now, when you look at the current zoning, and thank you to the folks that pointed this out, there's not much of a gap between the current zoning and what would be a medium density designation to really justify this change. That's not quite true for this other component here, which currently doesn't have any housing on it. It's a mix of RA4 and RA2. So this would basically just make that designation consistent across that whole section of 16th Street. So number 4, for a similar reason as the one before, we also decided to remove this recommendation, which we had initially suggested as making that medium density consistent. Similarly, there is not much of a significant gap between the current zoning and medium density to really justify having to do anything here. I'm happy to talk about that in a little more detail, but I hope that example that I outlined earlier makes that choice understandable. So number 5 here, I think we're pretty eager about. So this was the one change that the Office of Planning did make, and you'll see that we've modified some of it, but not all of it. This is currently the MPD 3D headquarters and the Engine 9 firehouse, along with the large parking facility there. This is DC-owned land, which means that any new housing there needs to comply with our new-ish public land disposition law, which means that at least 30% of the housing has to be affordable in perpetuity, and that hits affordability levels for very low and low-income residents. That's the 30% and 50% MFI levels that have been so challenging to build. We're really excited about that disposition law. It's something that the council members pushed for really strongly, and we hope to be able to use it as one of our most powerful tools for setting a baseline of affordability across the ward. So the reason we made this particular recommendation is to try and max out that possibility of affordable housing and increase the basically increase the possibilities here. There is some text associated with this change that also suggests or recommends a DC Public Library facility, which is consistent with DCPL's plan for a facility between the DuPont Circle and Adams Morgan neighborhoods. That is included as an associated recommendation here. And we chose to allow the medium density residential to remain on the north part of the site because it's walking back from the higher intensity arterial of U Street to the row houses on V Street to the north, and we want to enable the future architecture to reflect that step back into the neighborhood. This should say number 6, but the final one, number 6, is this sort of triangle-shaped block between 18th, U Street, Florida, and California. So currently this is, I believe, the only location along that 18th Street commercial corridor that doesn't contain any residential units. And it's also the only one that, if you look at the original future land use map, has, for most of it, only a commercial designation and not the striped mixed use with commercial and residential. So again, while we don't foresee any future change here, we believe this is consistent with policies and should enable the creation of residential units where there currently are none, should anything occur here. So I know that was a lot. I'm sure there are plenty of questions, and looking forward to the ANC's discussion. So I'm going to leave this page up. Here is the legend of the whole future land use map. Here are the recommendations as modified, and I included that red box for discussion of number 1 there. And then these are from the enacted comprehensive plan that the council passed in 2019, which goes into detail as to what exactly the definitions of these residential zones or designations are. So I will stop there, have a drink of water, and I guess pass it back to you, Commissioner Gold.
David, thank you so much for that. And I appreciate that you end here with an answer to my first question, which was going to be an explanation of, low, moderate, medium housing. So I'm glad that you put this up here, and clearly it shows that I did not do my homework ahead of time and read this presentation after you sent it. But thank you for walking us through that. As a reminder for everyone on the call, I have just shared a link to these slides in the chat. And of course, if you are one of the people calling in, it is also available on our website through the agenda for this meeting. I think I have an initial question that I think you answered, but I just want to clarify, because I know some of the questions we've gotten from residents have been, given that there were already amendments and a previous process, why these recommendations are coming in now. It sounds to me that you sort of looked at the changes that were proposed for the ward and recognized that ANC 1C had so few changes compared to what could be. Is that a correct understanding?
I would say that's part of it, and that's definitely a good question. I think that, as we indicated, the round of feedback that OP received and requested from residents and ANCs is just one step of this process. And that was all in the lead up to submitting the proposed amendments to the council. But then, of course, the council has its own public engagement process. That's the process of hearings. Councilmember Nadeau held her own open house on Ward 1 specific elements of the plan. And so we're trying to be reflective of all of that feedback that we've gotten at the council stage of the process, and try and match up the council members' priorities for affordable housing and other amenities for the ward to that feedback that we've received. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that does answer my question. Thank you so much. Just a note, Gordon, if you can promote Commissioner Wood to make sure that he's in the conversation as well.
Yes, sir.
I don't have other questions at the moment. Do Commissioner Faulkner, Commissioner Irani, as members of the committee, do you have any questions for David?
I think this was really helpful and very thorough. And I think one thing I just wanted to mention that was very helpful was the clarification that this doesn't change any underlying zoning, and that changes will still building up to the FLUM will still require either a map amendment or a PUD if the zoning is a gap. And I think one other question, I guess, that I've heard from folks is about historic preservation. And I think because some of these, or actually, I guess I don't know that any of the current ones are in a historic district now that I'm looking, because the one that's removed. But I guess my understanding is that it doesn't change, any of the compliance with that as well.
That's true. Yeah, this may not have made it into the version I'm presenting, but I thought I added at some point that other land use policies like historic preservation still apply no matter what the future land use map says. So that is very much true.
Well, first, thanks for such a detailed and very helpful presentation, and also the way that you had conducted the process to take feedback and modify it with your maps, with the presentation ahead of the meeting. I find that to be very helpful and engaging. But a specific question I have, and one that also a more general concern I've heard. So I'll start with my specific question. What's 6 on the map that's currently on the screen? It says residential medium density. And it's, you're right, that there aren't any residents there right now. It's a really tricky few parcels of land. And that particular series of intersections is already quite problematic. So has there been any impact studies of what putting medium density residential, just adding more pedestrians to that intersection? Let me just put that, right?
Sure.
That intersection is terrible. It's very, very problematic. And putting much more there seems like it might need a study. That's all I'm saying, for that.
So I think that's a good question. And I guess this is kind of a question in response is what exact kind of impact studies we're talking about here. I think in general, because the comprehensive plan is a guiding land use document, and there are all sorts of policies and procedures that flow out from it, including, hearings at the Zoning Commission, processes at the ANC, the Zoning Board of Adjustment, review by DDOT, if we're talking about transportation here, that it's kind of hard to do an impact study of that one particular block of the future land use map. First of all, because we don't know that anything will result from it. It's general guidance. But I would also say that it does provide the ANC an opportunity, again, by providing that gap between the current zoning and what is possible under the FLUM, might allow you to say, include a reconfiguration of that 18th Florida and U intersection, which I know the ANC has wanted for quite a while, as part of any future development project. I'm not promising that, but I'm saying like that's the kind of opportunity that's opened up here that may not necessarily be under a by right development.
Right. Yeah. I think it's just it was just two things that just converged right there. Some of the feedback I received was, hey, have there been impact studies? And the other one that came to mind as you were going through it was, man, that intersection is really problematic. So, but totally understand, and I think it's important for everyone to grasp that this is not a zoning map, that it is more of a touchstone that we, as a guiding post, I guess, the FLUM, that is. So thank you for articulating that, David.
Of course.
Other commissioners from the commission, do you have any other? Fiona, do you have your hand up? Sorry,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunn.
Thanks, Commissioner Gold. Hi, David. Thanks for this explanation. I just wanted to go over number 3 on this one.
Sure.
There is proposed development on the part of the Meridian International Center. And so how would this upplumbing impact the proposed development? I realize that I know you just were explaining zoning versus FLUM, but I was just wondering, that, and then what's what looks like an empty box between Crescent and Florida? Like, is that not going to get?
Yeah,
upflown?
so the empty box there was part of the original set of recommendations that we've modified and reduced back to moderate density based on feedback. And part of that has to do with my answer to your first question, which is that the Meridian Hill area there, familiar with the efforts to develop that space. You know, as part of this analysis, we went back and looked at some of the zoning cases there. This is my understanding. I'm going to try to answer that question as completely as I can. So number 3 there in orange, part of it is RA4 and part of it is RA2. RA2, I would say, is about in the middle of moderate density as far as the relationship between the FLUM and zones. And RA4 is towards the upper end of what would be moderate density and towards the low to middle end of what would be medium density. And again, you know, all of this is really context specific. Like all of these can be totally different, and it's sort of up to the zoning commission's interpretation. But I would say that's the general assessment. So essentially, this is mostly matching the current zoning designation there, and making that, you know, consistent across the property to the small component of it that's RA2. It then also could potentially allow for the ANC to negotiate, to have some negotiating space between RA4 and some other designation that would be consistent with medium density. Did that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think another thing to note that's important is that, you know, we can't compel a project to ask for a map amendment or ask for a PUD. So we may make that change. I believe that's in your SMD. And, you know, there may be no development. There may be something proposed by right. You know, this expands the options, but it doesn't set us down a particular path.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bowles.
Yeah, thank you so much for this, David and Councilmember Nadeau's team. I'm definitely excited about all of these things. This just allows us, at least from my understanding, to give us more leverage. And I'm particularly excited about 707 and number 5. I really think that could be a really cool opportunity for putting in really large library, one is at a destination spot, not just a pickup spot, that will also, I mean, center Adams Morgan and the DuPont neighborhoods. So really excited about that. And I really like all of these amendments. We had our time, it's your time, and I'm glad that you are using what, you know, you're using what we have put forward and working off of that. So we want more affordable housing. We want more housing here. That seems very evident. Like I said last year, we're the Ward 3 of Ward 1, and we can do better, and this is an opportunity to do so. So thank you so much.
Commissioner Faulkner.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to certainly echo that I love the opportunity to potentially negotiate for more affordable housing if, you know, in the future with any of these, with several of these parcels. And then also, I just wanted to ask about the red box in 1 and, you know, sort of, I guess it sounds like that's just under discussion for being potentially added. And so I just want to say that seems to me to, you know, a lot of those, there are some larger buildings. There are several larger buildings in that section, but then there are certainly, you know, a fair amount of, you know, one-story commercial. But it seems to me that may make sense given, you know, what is already there and the continuation with the rest of Columbia. But I'm certainly curious to hear what other folks have to say.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. And yeah, just to add on to that, I believe this was in the chat as well. I think that red box is part of a historic district. And again, historic district designations still apply. HPRB review still applies. But the reason that we box that area off is that after some consideration, if there is support for the change on the north side of Columbia Road, north of Biltmore, there isn't really much that distinguishes anything between Biltmore and Kalorama Park. So we thought it best to make that consistent.
Great. Commissioner Wood.
Yeah, thanks. I don't have too much to say. Just because we're talking about my SMD, I thought I'd chime in. I was actually kind of messing around with some maps yesterday and didn't realize until just recently that I think, don't mark my words, I think that ANC 1C03 is the only SMD in all of DC that has 2 non-overlapping historic districts, neither of which is a park. Rock Creek, which is interesting because I have, a lot of my conversations with constituents and also neighbors are about how people want more housing and more affordable housing, and also for affordable housing to be, tailored towards like 30% of income. And that's hard when, it's hard to put more units in an area. So it's nice, especially, I think I'm kind of being a broken record here, but the explanation of just what this document does and does not do. There's a lot of gray space, which is often point of conversation, but at least for me, and I think for a lot of constituents I've spoken to, it's really helpful to have that laid out, because we're in my SMD in specific, but also Adams Morgan, pretty unique situation in terms of, the history, but also just what's potential in the future. So thanks.
Thanks, Commissioner. And I think that tees up nicely, just a quick aside about some of the other stuff that the council member is doing, both in and outside of the comprehensive plan. So, this is the land use component. There is a lot that we can do or should do related to both affordable housing and the prevention of displacement that we're pursuing in addition to this. Part of that is, as I mentioned before, some of the work that the council member did on the framework of the comprehensive plan. So that was the first chapter that the council passed previously. So, included affordable housing and anti-displacement measures as a highest priority. We also just passed the development expertise for ANC's bill, which has to be funded, but gives our ANCs across the district more technical support in negotiating some of these projects, because we know there can often be a mismatch between individual ANCs and also between ANCs and communities and developers. So trying to close that gap of knowledge and really enable you all to do that work. And all of this is totally leaving out the money side of this and the legislation, which is, how much we're contributing to the Housing Production Trust Fund, how much we have in vouchers, all of the work that we do with the Department of Human Services in prevention of homelessness, in emergency rental assistance, in rent control. I can go on, but these are also things that the council member is working on. So I want to make sure that we're not getting just lost in this one map.
No, I do appreciate that. I've been active with cancel rent and rent control and activist movements, and the nuance is important, but it's often hard to articulate. So thanks for doing a great job.
Proud of all the Ward 1 organizing that's been there.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Wood. So let's move on to comments from the community. I think the best way to go through this, David, if it makes sense for you, is have a few people comment, and then we can come back to you. So maybe let's keep track of any questions, but also provide this opportunity to hear some comments from the community as well. So for those who are on the Zoom call, please use the raise hand function. For if you are one of the people calling in by phone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand, and then I'll be able to recognize you that way. So let's start with Carl Schmidt.
Carl Schmidt. I live at Beekman Place, and I just wanted to recognize the change in number 3 and thank the council member for removing Beekman Place from the proposed change from moderate to medium density. We are a established low level community and don't see a need to change it. Don't know why it was proposed in the first place, but just wanted to thank you for that.
Great, thank you for that comment. Bart Leonard.
Hello, speaking on behalf of Bart Leonard. This is his wife, Barbara Krumsick. I want to thank you for the removal of recommendation 4, which has been a very vibrant community of both historic properties as well as some larger buildings. And I know it was removed. I would like to applaud the removal and specifically ask a question of concern about under what circumstances would something that's removed be reinserted. But in the meantime, thank very much Councilmember Nadeau for removing recommendation 4.
Of course. So your question is under what circumstances the removal might be reversed?
Right.
Yeah.
So don't expect to do that. As I tried to explain when we were going through that particular change, and frankly, thanks go out to the community and folks that gave us feedback, where that distance between the current zoning and what a medium density designation on this map would be doesn't really create that space that we're looking for that the community would be able to leverage. So it's not really meeting our criteria.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you for that comment and question. Alan Gambrell.
Hi, good evening. You hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I have 3 comments. One, regarding recommendation 3, I just would also agree. It was good to see Beekman Place removed from the proposal. And also regarding the Meridian property just north of that, I do think that does need to be changed. It does merit dense development. I supported that when I was on the ANC, although as you likely know, that's tied to the abutting Meridian International property, which is a different zone. That's meaning in RA categories. My second comment regarding recommendation 5 in U Street, regarding that step back on 17th Street, that's a generous parcel, and breaking it apart like that may make development more problematic than it needs to be, much like what happened with the Ward 1 shelter on 14th Street, which was partially occupied by the Rita Bright Center and was really a lost opportunity for the city. Instead of demoing the Rita Bright Center and rebuilding that along with the new Ward 1 shelter, it just wasn't really done well. So I would encourage the proposal to not notch back on 17th Street, but treat that all as one big parcel. My third and final comment is a little uncomfortable, but I understand that by home rule charter, City Council has little role in zoning regulations. Nonetheless, I've lost faith in Councilmember Nadeau's judgment when it comes to zoning and planning matters, and this is why. Because the council member chose to ignore the zoning rules regarding her advocacy for the Ward 1 short-term family housing, which I just mentioned, which is built on 14th Street. Her position was that that building was now built was not an emergency shelter and thus did not require special exception review by the Board of Zoning Adjustment. As a consequence, along with other zoning tricks used by the city, the neighboring building, whose residents, by the way, supported that shelter, now has its courtyard locked in. Now, Nadeau took that position even though it is contrary to the zoning regulations, which define an emergency shelter in relation to the short-term family housing legislation, which Nadeau is quite familiar with, as she rightfully advocated for housing the homeless. Her position is also contrary to that of Mayor Bowser, who publicly has stated that all the ward shelters went through before the Board of Zoning Adjustment for special exception review. Ward 1 shelter did not. So just to wrap it up, I'm well aware that the BZA voted that the Ward 1 shelter was not in fact a shelter. Illogical? Yeah, I'll just say welcome to the world of the Board of Zoning Adjustment. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for your comment. And regarding the U Street parcel, I think that's a good point. So we can, you know, take a closer look at that, and of course we'll talk to others who are interested in that.
Thank you for that comment, Alan. Chris Otten.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Chris. Yeah.
Hi, Chris Otten, former ANC commissioner here. David Meny, I am really surprised to hear your description of what the flum is. And so I've been working on, as you know, this issue with the Grassroots Planning Coalition for at least 3 years now. And the flum is actually quite a powerful map. It does have the weight of law, and it goes beyond guidance, because what it does, it allows the zoning commission to set the underlying zoning district for the zone map. So what we see here is changes going from moderate density residential development to what the flum now is allowing medium density residential. And as Mr. Meny pointed out, that framework was passed earlier, I think in 2018 or 2019. The medium density was reset to be 90-foot tall buildings, so 9-story tall buildings. That means any of the landowners along Columbia Road do not have to go to the ANC, do not have to go to the community. If these changes are passed, and go to the zoning commission and say, the flum says I'm allowed a 90-foot tall building here, can you change the underlying zoning density from 4 stories to 9 stories? And they will be granted that as a pro forma matter of right change to the zone map. There'll be one hearing. It's not a contested hearing. There'll be no parties. There'll be no community benefits. There'll be no ties to more affordability. It will just be a pro forma map change to allow a 90-foot tall building up and down Columbia Road, wherever you see the brown change there. So here's the thing. What I heard tonight was, and I need to put this on the record because we have to be very clear about this. These changes are supposed to come with planning. When you go from 4-story buildings to 9-story buildings, essentially doubling population growth along Columbia Road, along 16th Street, at a very busy intersection on Florida and 18th, and along U Street. Actually there it's high density, so we're talking at least 10 stories, maybe 12 stories with the free penthouse on top. Significant population growth requires planning, not just the swish of the pen on a map. And in fact, that's in the law as highlighted in the 2020 ANC resolution on the comp plan changes that existed before these map changes, last minute, 11:59 p.m. before the comp plan's even about to be marked up at the end of the month. We're conversing about significant population growth in Adams Morgan here. And it is a requirement by law that those impacts the population impacts be analyzed. Do we need more libraries? Do we need more parks? How are our sewer systems going to stand up to all this additional population? Do we want a canyon on Columbia Road? Can we do that with the schools? Can we have an additional population growth that doesn't overcrowd our schools? This is not planning what we're seeing tonight. This is a significant change with the swish of a pen, and it's not guidance. The developers, the landowners who look at this map can now go, as soon as it's passed, to the zoning commission. And all this talk about negotiations and giving us leverage, that's all out the window, because it's a matter of right now for them to go and ask for the zone to be changed to 9-story buildings along Columbia Road and all these changes here. So I needed to put that on the record, okay? I need to stand against this, not per se because I'm against population growth, not per se that I'm against density. The law requires impact studies, as noticed by this ANC to the Office of Planning back in 2020.
Great, thank you. Nick Rowland.
Commissioner Gold, if you wouldn't mind, I just want to respond to that really quick.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
So thanks, Chris, and appreciate having been able to work with you on the comp plan for a couple of years now. I can't respond to all of that, but what I do want to say is that that relationship between the future land use map and by right development is not quite so clear. What I want to make sure is clear to the folks at this meeting is that even if we wipe away any of the changes on this map, that still allows for a similar process to occur where a current property owner can go and build a by right development. In fact, with even less input from the zoning commission or the ANC or the community, because in most of these places, there's at least a small gap where there is unbuilt zoning envelope. And we've seen what that looks like in Adams Morgan, right? It's 4 stories or so on top of an existing building with little to no affordability. So to be very clear, that is possible still under all of these circumstances. And unless we radically downzone, that will continue to be the case. To the point on impact statements, I have been pretty familiar with that section of the code because I think one of the council members' primary goals in this amendment cycle for the comp plan is to try and establish better guidelines for how we amend and rewrite the comp plan in the future. Because, I think as you've successfully pointed out, a lot of it's not very clear. And we want to make sure that we set up better guardrails. But through review of the procedures that we have now, I can tell you that the impact assessment requirement is a requirement that the council imposes on the executive, not the other way around. So what we're doing here is taking the professional input from OP, the resolutions we've received from our ANCs, the input from the hearing, and the subsequent input from constituents, and incorporating that as best we can into our own analysis. So I'll stop there.
Thanks for those comments. Nick Rowland.
I just wanted to thank David and the council member's office for putting this together, presenting and answering questions. Definitely really excited about the prospects of number 5. If it could bring a library or other services to the neighborhood, that'd be awesome. I definitely would like to do some more outreach in Strivers Row and on V Street before removing that V Street setback. Is my understanding correct that it would still be one building? It just would be a few floors shorter on the V Street side. Is that?
That's one option. There hasn't been an RFP issued for that public redevelopment yet. So the details are still unknown. It could be 2 different buildings. It could be one building with a step back. I think there are a number of possibilities.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So just to clarify, you're going to be asking folks about the V Street side in what capacity?
Well, hearing from another speaker earlier about keeping it all the same, I think it's important to hear from those who live down in Strivers Row on C and on V Street on their opinions on it as well. Sure. So I would like to kind of hear a little bit more from them.
Okay, if it's helpful for those conversations too, just because that whole redevelopment parcel is one, say we maintain that high density residential across all of it, which would enable additional affordable housing. That doesn't mean that the design couldn't still step back onto the row house side. The current arrangement here where it's split up just makes that a little bit more certain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Cesar Maxit.
Hi, thank you. My comment is in regards to number 5, specifically around this library. There's guidance for a library, but I don't understand what that guidance, that's sort of unclear. Brianne has mentioned to me and several other neighbors that there would be a library for that location as part of the Reeves RFP. The Reeves RFP does not say the library would be part of this location. It does say that 14th and U, there would be a library as part of that project. And I'm not sure why Brianna is so concerned about meeting the library needs of Ward 2 when she's our council person, and we need a library. We have needed a library in Adams Morgan for many years. There's been calls for an Adams Morgan library at 18th and Columbia for over 50 years now. And that's where the neighbors want. We want a library at the heart of our community. And that's possible. That's possible now. And I'm not sure there's this nebulous idea about a library at 17th and U that Brianna keeps pushing, and I'm not sure why she's so adamantly going against the request of the community to place a library in the middle of our ward.
So I wouldn't call that nebulous, because I think the public redevelopment there is forthcoming. So to clarify, it was not included in the Reeves Center site because the development, although they're kind of considered in tandem, the Reeves Center and number 5 here, this location, are being advertised separately and planned slightly separately. So that's the reason it was not included in the Reeves Center solicitation. And Tanya, correct me if I'm inaccurate on any of this. That section on U Street there is part of Ward 1. It is within the bounds of 1C. And because it is a redevelopment on public land that the district already owns that we know is coming, that's why the council member identified it as a likely potential site for the library that has been planned. And when you look at DCPL's strategic planning that identifies the gaps in the library system, they name the main gap as North DuPont Circle and Adams Morgan. So we're actually kind of lucky that we have a public site here that's undergoing redevelopment that is functionally in the bullseye of that strategic plan. That's not quite true of 18th and Columbia. And it's also true that that is not currently publicly owned land. The parcel may not be large enough for the kind of facility that DCPL is planning, although I'm not part of their team, so I don't want to speak to that exactly. But it is true that instead of being able to incorporate a DCPL recommendation as part of the advertisement of a currently moving public redevelopment, we would have to go through the budgeting and negotiation of site acquisition, which currently is not planned. Tanya, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. So there's a difference between the Reeves Center RFP, which is for one site, and the entire Reimagine Reeves plan, planning process that was undertaken. That was a study that included chunks of not just the Reeves Center area, but also the entire Strivers section, which is the lower half of Adams Morgan and on into what you're describing as Ward 2. But Strivers straddles Ward 1 and Ward 2. It originally was part of Ward 1. That's the neighborhood that actually my family is from. So I'm intimately familiar with it. And the idea is that the library that we've been advocating for since the council member was first elected, and we tried to get into the Marie Reeves Center, should come and serve the Ward 1 community that you're talking about. I just don't want anybody to conflate Reimagine Reeves with the actual Reeves Center. There's two different things that have happened. One included a broader study that had several sites all along U Street, basically. And the other one is the actual Reeves RFP, which is a totally different thing, but leaves tremendous space for a lot of things to be developed inside of what is an incredibly large site. So I just don't want anybody to conflate those two things.
Thanks for clearing that.
Just perhaps if you saw this, I guess a follow-on question here in the chat from Mr. Maxit about DC land versus private land. If you'd like to answer that, you're welcome to. Or
I just want to say one thing about that. I don't, because I don't work for the executive, so I'm not in charge of the PPP program. I didn't make any of the guidelines for it, and but I do know a lot about land acquisition, and I think that as taxpayers, one of the things we're really interested in is maximizing land that we already own and developing it in positive ways to serve the communities. And the idea of acquiring new sites is one that should be undertaken with thoughtful precision, and also with cost in mind, and a thought about like where the money's going to come from and how it's all going to be used properly. So it's not unheard of for the District of Columbia to acquire private sites, but it hasn't happened a lot in the last few years. PPP is public-private partnerships, and usually what that entails is either a private entity coming to a public piece of property and developing something that serves the public, in addition to whatever the private use is that they're trying to get into play, which has been very helpful for public facilities in particular. And that is something that could happen on any of the sites that we're talking about that are publicly owned. I think that all of us who are involved in helping to run and manage the city's budget think about all of the things that we have to figure out how to pay for on an annual basis. And so it's not an impossibility that a site could be acquired, but it's also one of those things that is hard to make a case for when there is a publicly owned site walkable from the site that is under discussion.
I think don't have anything to add to that. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Vikram.
Hey there. Hello, everyone. Glad to be here, and thank you, David, for the presentation, and Tanya for your comment just now. I come to this as a licensed counselor in the district, and I kind of see the impact of decisions or things like this on the other end, where people end up homeless or traumatized in some way, losing businesses. And I'll give you a specific, for example, to do with this exact plan on the recommendation with the red box along Columbia Road. Remy, the flower vendor, had a shop in that exact stretch in the 1990s. And a series of land use choices were made where essentially the value of the land went up by about 5 times. And he had a triple net lease, which meant that he was liable for the taxes as well. And the taxes went up so much because the assessment went up so much that it put him out of business. He still drives 50 miles every Saturday morning because he loves our community to provide flowers 20 years later. But I just want to put into the conversation thinking about those kinds of impacts of people losing businesses, people losing their homes that are next to or on these properties because values are significantly going up. And the concrete question I have about that is, have we looked at exactly what the increase in value is going to be with this upflumming on these various properties, and who exactly those people are? Have we done a racial analysis of, like, are we, impacting people along those lines, either to benefit white landowners more or not benefit Black homeowners and business owners and other minorities? That's my question.
Thank you for that comment. I don't know if David, you have a response to that.
I think there's a couple components to that. Thank you for the background there. When it comes to business displacement, I think that's a challenging issue to address with just, especially this map alone, but only through land use. As I was talking about with the various housing, rent control, anti-displacement policies that are also a priority, I think that's something that you need to pair other policies and budgetary items with if we really want to have a tangible impact on individual business owners or individual tenants. Because property values, especially in this part of DC, are, as we all know, going up like crazy. And that is true whether or not there is a change to the future land use map. In fact, when you look across the district, where you see property values going up the most is where there tends to be the least amount of change in land use and intensity. So that is not a full answer, but
also, I'm sorry, David.
Yeah, go ahead.
But also, I would say, Vikram, that you know that the council member is chairing the Committee on Human Services and overseeing the end of homelessness. And part of our point is to figure out how we can have more tools in the toolbox to create more affordability. And we certainly are not embarking upon plans to destroy people's businesses, move people out, price them out, or any of the other things that have happened in the last 50 years of the neighborhood that I'm from. None of the people that I grew up knowing in Adams Morgan are there. Very few of them are there. None of the Black people that I know, I should say, that I grew up knowing, who even own their properties in that neighborhood, are there anymore because of all of the property value increases that have happened. And because of some of the historic stuff that's happened as well, a lot of people in both Adams Morgan and Mount Pleasant have been forced into incredibly untenable situations because they're not allowed to make changes based on someone else's idea of preserving their community. So we are pretty focused on making sure that the policies that are implemented with an eye toward racial equity. And I think that that's part of the reason why we did as much work as we did on the issue of equity on the comp plan. It's something we continue to examine as we pass every single law in the District of Columbia with an eye toward that lens, thanks to Councilmember McDuffie. And it's something that I'm happy that you brought up today. We'll certainly try to do a little bit more work to extend to you some examples of stuff that we're doing about, making sure that this is not going to negatively affect folks. But I also want to make sure that we all recognize that in addition to having maps that reflect our values, we have to have leaders that reflect our values, and we have to actually act on them in a neighborhood context. So when we're in community meetings and at ANC meetings and we're having discussions about neighborhoods, people like Vikram do need to speak up about how this will affect the least of us. And all of the people who are elected need to make sure that they're enacting and working with those folks. And it's not just an idea, it's an actual practice. So I'm happy to try to follow up and get a little bit more information to you and to work through some of the people that you seem to be specifically concerned about. My understanding also with Columbia Road and specifically with the floral shop that you're talking about is that a bunch of those decisions were made and they were made by administrations that were much more focused on monetizing communities. And so we're hoping that we can figure out how to create policies that don't focus on monetizing communities and do focus on helping people.
Thank you for that. A concrete thing that Remy, in my conversation with him about this, that we came to was, and this is probably, the ship has sailed largely, like you said, in Adams Morgan. People are displaced and gone in large part. In maybe other areas, or even to do with properties like this where property values are going to go up. I mean, if you take something from 4 stories of air rights to 9 stories, that you're printing about $1,000 a foot. That's could be $2, $3, $4 million on even a small property. And so the concrete question to do with that is, do we have a way of preventing people from experiencing spikes in their property taxes connected with spikes in the land, the assessed value of the land that they're on?
Yes. the answer to that is yes. If they have affordability in the unit, if they have subsidy, if they have, we can also provide tax abatements. The way to make sure that your increased density does not increase your tax bill is to include affordability in your project.
And how about neighbors?
Pardon me?
How about neighbors?
So your individual assessment, people's assessments go up depending on all the development that happens in their neighborhood. It's like one of the reasons why we talk about, I just noticed that someone in chat said define affordable, please. When I'm talking about affordability, I'm talking about the full gamut. I'm talking about all the way from 30 and below to 80% of AMI. I'm not talking about anything over that. I'm not talking about anything over 80% of AMI, but I'm really focused very much in 50 below. 50% of AMI and below. Rental, we're really talking about 30% of AMI. And it's true, people's tax bills go up when anything is developed. Like if there's a blank spot on your block and a community facility comes along, that improves the entire block, and it does tend to make people's taxes, it does make your neighborhood more desirable, but there are a ton of circuit breakers for different people. There are circuit breakers for people based on their age. There are circuit breakers based on for people based on their income. There are circuit breakers for people based on their tenure. There are also tax breaks for people who develop affordable housing. And there are ways that we look at total property and its benefit. And we have lots of things like that. So,
thank you for that.
So there are a lot of ways to help people, to your point, Vikram, and there are a lot of ways to increase, to maintain some naturally occurring affordability without me getting on my affordable housing soapbox. There are many, many other tools that I'm happy to follow up with you after this and talk through with you.
Just to add to that as well, I think when you look at the increase in property tax rates and you look at where growth has been distributed or where no new housing has been added in the district at all, it's not exactly a clear relationship. Property tax rates go up without anything happening, or they do with new development as well. So it's not quite a one-to-one relationship.
Okay. The idea of insulating people from the moment that they take residency or ownership of a business space from those kinds of spikes with a cost of living based assessment increase rather than a market based assessment increase. I think it's built into some things that you were talking about, Tanya, but I would appreciate follow-up about that. And just generally to, and I thank you for all your responses.
I always take your phone call, so you know where to find me.
Generally this idea of really drilling down to who are the specific people who are benefiting or getting hurt by any of these changes, and can we mitigate harms, like very, very concretely, like prevent people from losing their businesses or this sort of thing.
I think that this is a great conversation. There's a lot that we could do with property taxes. It's something that I'm also interested in talking about. I think we're getting a little bit beyond the scope of this discussion. But as with Tanya, happy to continue that conversation further, because I think there are a lot of knobs to tweak, especially as we establish the new tax revision commission that we could consider.
Thank you, Vikram, for those questions. I see Alan Gambrell, do you want to raise your hand again, or you just had it raised from the last time? Alan, you're okay. Cesar, are you just keeping your hand raised up, or do you have another comment or question? Okay, commissioners, at the risk of reopening the conversation, David started this by asking what thoughts are on that strip from Biltmore to Columbia, to Calera Park. Have you, I guess, do you have any thoughts on that, or can we task you to maybe speak with your constituents about their thoughts on that? I don't know the best way forward on that, but I want to make sure that we consider that if possible. Commissioner Faulkner, Commissioner Wood, any thoughts?
I'm happy to reach out to folks and ask for feedback on that. You know, it abuts, it is right next to my SMD, but is not in my SMD, the red portion. So I would be happy to do, talk to folks and see what people think. I'm inclined to think that it's very similar to the rest of that strip, as David mentioned, but I am happy to solicit more feedback.
Thank you.
So with that, first of all, thank you, David. Thank you, Tanya. This has been really a great, both a presentation and a great community discussion. A question I have is, what is the process going forward? So when, I'm welcoming, as the chair of this committee, neighbors can email me or email their commissioners, or I suppose maybe you want them to email you, but I guess when do we need to get comments to you to impact these recommendations from the council member?
It's a little flexible. I would say just sometime in the coming weeks. It's a bit of a moving target, but we are collaborating with the chairman and other council members' offices to move towards markup, which I think we're expecting some movement on next month. We can, be nimble and adaptive as you all give us some more feedback. But I would say within the next couple of weeks would be ideal.
Sure. So something for you to think about is if you would put your emails, assuming you want direct communication from neighbors, to put your emails in the chat, that would be helpful. I've just two things. One is I see we have a hand raised from Larry Hargrove, who I know has had the opportunity to send in some comments, but I think that perhaps Mr. Hargrove can be concise, so I'll let you speak now. Want to make sure we get everything in. Mr. Hargrove, if you will need, okay, you're good to go.
I had first a procedural question, which may now have been answered, and that is as to the status of these proposals, which surprisingly found out tonight seem to be something of a moving target. I gather then that no proposals of this sort have been put forward by Council Member Nadeau to the Committee of the Whole or to the chairman or any of his staff as proposals now endorsed by the council member. Is that correct?
So what we're trying to do right now is, we're in frequent communication with the chairman's office. So no, these are not proposals that, are being offered as amendments. We're making sure that, council staff is aware of the conversations that we're having with you all, and that we are presenting our recommendations and soliciting feedback, and that this is an ongoing conversation. So the chairman's office has been made aware of these recommendations, but has also been made aware that this feedback is happening. And also, Mr. Hargrove, I want to thank you for some of your analysis, which was helpful and informative.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Larry. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, as everyone is aware, there will come a time quite shortly when the ambiguities to the status of any such proposals will have to be resolved, because just around the corner is the action by the council on the entire comprehensive plan, including the FLUM. Mm-hmm. But I had another question to the committee chair. We're now terminating discussion on the substance of the proposals.
Yeah, I think we're sort of wrapping up the end of the discussion. I apologize. I don't know if you were not here for the earlier part of the discussion, but we've been on this topic for quite some time, and I think in many ways the discussion has run its course. That's where we are. I got an email from a participant who has been raising his hand, and not in my system, but I will give him the floor for a moment. But other than that, I don't think there's much else that hasn't already been discussed. And I'd be happy for you to, you could reach out to me in the future on this matter, Mr. Hargrove, or if you have other comments that haven't been addressed at the moment, that would be great.
Well, just as a matter of accuracy, I've been on the Zoom call since the outset, and I'm happy to accede to whatever you want to do by way of terminating the meeting. But there has not been a great deal of discussion or an exhaustive discussion on the individual proposals coming from members of the community. But if you're suggesting that we do that in writing, that's something we can certainly do. As you know, I've already expressed some views, but they would have to be in writing, but they would have to be modified in light of the changes, which we've been told about only tonight. So I'm in your hands. You're in charge of the meeting, so I accede to whatever suggestion you have to make in that regard.
Sure. I would just note that this, again, as I noted at the beginning, and I'm glad, I just didn't have a chance to keep track of all the names on the roster. I'm glad you have been here from the beginning. I would note that this meeting is a venue provided for David and Tanya from the council members team. The commission is not taking any stance on these proposals, and so I guess I'm not understanding your question about the process for changes going forward, because those changes would go through the council member's office.
Well, to go back to your comment at the outset of the meeting, and which you've just reiterated, understand that the committee does not plan to take any position on any of these proposals. Do I infer correctly from that the ANC itself will not take any position, and that the feedback from the community will come directly from the community to the council member and not through the ANC or its committee?
I believe that's a correct understanding, yes.
Yeah. Well, that does clarify matters, because obviously any action by the ANC itself is likely to come only after some decisions have already been made about relevant matters, because of the schedule for considering the comp plan in the committee of the whole. Mm-hmm. But just correct me if I'm wrong, then should members of the community who wish to address these issues with the council member just do so directly in writing or otherwise?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you for a comment. Mr. James, I apologize, I did not see your hand earlier, but you're welcome to speak now.
Star 6, Dennis.
Star 6 to unmute. Let's see, Dennis, if you hit star 6, that would be great. Otherwise, in the meantime, Commissioner Arani.
There we go. Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Sorry about the digits are getting tired after a long day. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. For those who don't know, and I'm not making a big deal out of it, I just wanted you to know I'm president of the Colorado Citizens Association, and we've been involved in zoning matters and historic preservation matters for decades. And I want to start off by saying I agree that this is not what I would call planning. I think it will lead to speculation for some of these lots that are most likely to be redeveloped in some way. For instance, from the Imperial on Columbia Road up to Ontario Road, perhaps, where CVS and the Safeway and a few smaller buildings are. The same, it would be, I think, an utter disaster for the community to do anything upflumming where you've got your red dots in place along the commercial strip on the 1800 block of Columbia. That is such an important element in our neighborhood. Those little shops there, a pharmacy, various restaurants, fabulous carryout, a health food store, dry cleaners. They will go away if a bigger project happens behind there. They would loom over them. I sincerely doubt that any of them could be brought back because there would be higher rents, for the new redeveloped spaces, plus an historic district, and the facades must be preserved. And I'm sure that KCA would be very interested in working towards preserving them and defending them as they now stand. But anyway, I'm glad to see that number 4 was removed. I can't for the life of me think of why it was on the list to start with. To go back to number 1, I think that it's defensible to view the previously mentioned lots that I mentioned, the CVS, the Safeway, the 7-Eleven, and there's a game store there, I believe. But I mean, the two new, the second phase of, just blanking for a second, Admiral Heights is all approved and ready to go. Those were just built, so they're not going to get altered. So, it's understandable that the others might, because they're just sort of one-story buildings. But I think it might be wise to wait until a project comes along that wants to be bigger than the existing zoning. And that gives the ANC even greater ability because it will probably be a PUD. It would probably be encouraged by Office of Planning to be a PUD. And you'll get this opportunity anyway. So I would try as little as possible to interfere with, our existing shopping areas, which we at risk of losing if there's too great development.
I'm sorry.
And I'd like to, let me just finish my little points, and then I'll be glad to involve, have a little back and forth if you're willing to go that way. Number 6, between, encircled by California, Florida, and 18th Street. That's in a historic district. The 18th Street side properties are. I think it's from the alley. And then the building which houses Mint and a few other businesses is in the Recook overlay and is not historic. But that, so much has been developed. There's so much development that has gone on there already that has been very positive. For instance, the construction of Jack Rose and the Imperial, the maintenance of El Tamarindo. There's a planned restaurant for the open space there, which used to be a gas station. Raul Sanchez, the owner of L'Oreal Plaza, has permissions to build a restaurant there. So the idea of mixing in residents with all those restaurants, not a good mixture, because it'll be like constant complaints about all the little issues that come up with restaurants, even if they're very well behaved. And I just think that wouldn't be a good mix. So anyway, I do want to say something else, and it's related tangentially. I would love there to be more affordability. I'm a lucky guy. I bought a condemned row house in 1971, which I could never come close to affording now. But to strengthen the rent control law is a great way to preserve housing affordability. And I think there's quite a bit of rent control properties in Adams Morgan, which if there had been a better rent control all these years, and there could be a stronger one now, that might be a way to keep some of the places that are no longer affordable or, are heading out of affordability, keep them closer to that. And I'm also would like to mention the possibility of public housing. Like, I think the site where the firehouse and the police station are should be considered for public housing. Now that we, have had experience with years of not doing it right, surely we should know how to do it properly. And I would even welcome that at the 18th and Columbia SunTrust site, if that should ever be resolved in a way that, it might become a public property. So anyway, just wanted to mention those things. I appreciate the time, and I'd be delighted to answer any questions that, or maybe make a comment or two if anybody has anything.
I think David's going to answer you, Dennis. But you said my favorite thing that you always say, which is reminding people that you bought your house in 1971, and I always have to remind you that that was the year I was born. So congratulations on 50 years of home ownership in Adams Morgan.
Well, it was just to explain that I couldn't afford to buy it now. I'm just a working guy, you know, and that's how much prices have gone up. But I don't want to sell off and make $1 million. I want to live here. I enjoy my neighborhood.
Yeah, I wish my family. I wish my family could still live in that neighborhood too. I wish they could still afford their house.
Great.
Well, let's not get off topic here.
Yep. Dennis, thanks for those comments. David, did you have any response? Or?
Not too much of a back and forth, but just briefly, I think you make some great points. Rent control being a really excellent one. The council member was the one of the primary authors of the rent control expansion bill. We hope to be able to move forward. Just touching on a couple points there. As going back to our conversation about property tax increases, speculation is already happening throughout the district, whether or not there are changes to the future land use map or not. Individual properties in this part of DC are now going for, $1-2 million or more. And that is a form of private land speculation, often off of these corridors where we're looking at these future land use map changes. So I think that's an important thing to remember, is that the status quo is not neutral here. And then I think waiting for a project, say on Columbia Road, to want to be denser for us to make a change to the future land use map is something we want to avoid for two reasons. One is, as we stated earlier, the council member is really interested in trying to do appropriate planning here and make these recommendations without the incitement of a private developer. And we were very explicit about wanting to approach that from this angle. And also, the council only gets so many opportunities to engage with the comp plan. We can't take it up on our own. The mayor has to submit it, and then we can make changes. So if that kind of circumstance came around, we wouldn't be able to ask for a planned unit development if the future land use map wasn't appropriate, because the council wouldn't be able to make that change. So that is something that we do have to do proactively, if that makes sense. So I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Arani.
Thank you, Commissioner Gold. David, just a point of clarification, the red dotted area, are you proposing low density commercial, moderate density? Have you thought about that?
The suggestion, or the, I guess, item for discussion there, is to just maintain the recommendation consistent across the north side of Columbia. Excuse me. So that would be a mix of medium density residential and low density commercial, which is already the commercial designation. I could see us exempting that bottom square there and maintaining that as not mixed use with commercial, because it is that way currently, but more or less making that change whole across the corridor.
So is that between Biltmore and Mintwood, I suppose?
I guess a little past Mintwood, just to the boundary of the park. It's worth noting the building right on Calorama Park there is that already consistent with
yeah. So to that point, the red dotted area for discussion, it seems that the use is already low density commercial, right? And that's what we have there. And
that's true for some of the residential properties, but not true for the entirety of that block or that stretch.
Okay, so the residential maybe is like something to take a closer look at. I was bringing it up more on some of the other things that were dropped because there's not a sufficient difference between the current use and the proposed change. Some of the other recommendations that were dropped. But maybe I just need to take a closer look at that block.
Sure. Yeah, I think this is one of those where our ask is just think about it and get back to us.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, David. Thank you, Tanya. I think this has been an excellent discussion and back and forth and opportunity for us to hear what these recommendations are and to provide some feedback for that. So thank you so much for that time and for putting your emails in the chat where I saw you did. Maybe people will have to scroll up. Oh, thank you, David, for doing that again. I think with that, we'll end this part of the conversation and move on to the next agenda item.
Just a point. Could we just take a short break?
Yes, let's take a 2-minute break.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for having us and good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
I'll stay on because I love trees.
Do we have DDOT representatives, or is this just you?
No,
guys?
we're if you can, Brian Barry is going to speak to this. Thank you, Brian, for staying with us. And let me see if I can get this up.
I got him.
Oh, that was stop sharing. I wanted to.
Thanks, Zach.
Sure.
I don't really have anything prepared, but
that's okay.
Talk about it.
Okay. You're seeing my PDF there?
Yeah.
I'll be right back myself. Okay, so here we are again, and I recognize that it's already 8:50, and so I'd like to avoid a long discussion on this if possible, and if that's the case, we'll just move this to the next meeting. But about a year and a half ago, as background, the Department of Transportation's Urban Forestry Division came to the Business Improvement District with an idea for putting in trees into the plaza at the northeast corner of 18th and Columbia at Adams Mill. This was part of the Adams Morgan Vision framework. And so the bid and the DDOT worked a bit together and brought forward this plan that we're going to look at now. At the time, again, this was about a year ago, December, there was some conversation with the previous ANC and some community members, and the decision was made to get rid of this plan and to develop a plan that was designed by one of our neighbors, one of the, I believe, co-owners of Songbird, which was a very nice plan, and it was voted on and supported by the ANC. But then when it came down to it, Urban Forestry Division said that it was not a feasible plan for the way that it operates, given a number of issues in the plaza here. And I think the overriding issue for us as a community is that this is an open space that is quite exposed to the afternoon sun. And so that is why the Adams Morgan Vision Framework consensus plan really looked at it as creating a canopy of shade. And that's what Urban Forestry had put together. And so I had the idea to relook at that DDOT plan and see, if it does make sense and why we had passed on it the first time around, and to just bring that back to the agenda. Brian from the bid is on, and if I could ask you to add to that, if there's anything to add to that.
Yeah, that's fairly accurate. Although I think we went to DDOT instead of DDOT coming to us. It's something that had been discussed for a while. And again, yeah, it's very exposed there, especially in the summer, June and July. We used to do a concert series there, and it could be brutal. We had to put up tents just for shade. So basically, Alicia from Songbird put together a kind of a hand drawing. It wasn't really to scale. And that was something that the ANC liked, and that was what it was approved. Unfortunately, when we tried to convert that to real space, it didn't work. I worked with Elite to try to mimic her design, but the spaces really didn't line up. It ended up with things being bunched and stuff kind of in the way of pedestrians and of the accessible ramps. And yeah, it wasn't a workable plan. It didn't convert well. So and then with that, in light of that, excuse me, Elite, who's the DDOT landscape architect, basically it was looking like it would be maybe room for 1 or 2 trees, and then that wasn't really enough of a difference for them to invest the money in the in trees in the plaza. And so that's kind of where we are, sort of back to square one.
Great, thanks for that. And just to walk us through now, while I have my presentation open, this is an overview of the square, I believe. Let's see. This is what the square looks like now, for those who are unfamiliar and need some help. Of course, there is a large cherry blossom statue right in the middle of where this photo is at the moment, but otherwise that's what that looks like. So the idea would be to put 5 trees there in the middle to create a canopy of shade, as well as moving the bike share station from the wall of the bank towards the curb, and actually extending the length of the bike share. And I think as well, just so people understand, because I think from the top view, the canopy, which is what we're looking to create, where we want to create that shade, from the top, it sort of looks like a lot of coverage, and you might think, well, gosh, how can I walk around this this area, or if there was a little performance, sit down in this area. And I think that this proposal, this drawing here shows sort of how limited that scope of tree trunk actually is from the ground. Commissioners, committee members, do you have any thoughts on this? Commissioner Ryan.
I think some of the feedback that we received last time in the last go around was just that the trees would crowd out usage of the plaza. So, to the extent that they actually do, or maybe, we can mitigate those effects. And my understanding is that the pavement around the trees will still be walkable. It'll be usable. It'll be like the pervious pavement. So, and to the extent that it doesn't crowd out the plaza, perhaps it would just be helpful if we articulated that to the community.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Where looking at this picture here, so these small, I believe it says it's a 4x4 square around the tree is mulch, but the lighter darker color is still a surface that you could walk across. So that was, when we originally responded to urban forestry and said that some community response was that this space couldn't be usable given this configuration. They came back, and I guess they were almost baffled at our bafflement, because this is the type of setup they would have to use the space the way that we had created it. Again, I think part of the situation last time around was not building enough community understanding of the plan before we brought DDOT in to present on it, as I recall. Other commissioners, Commissioner Bowles?
Yeah, so thank you so much, Commissioner Gold, for following up on this. This is something that I ran on in 2018, and I, definitely worked with the bid and asked the bid to spearhead this issue. So I'm very glad that this is coming back. There's a few things that I think stand out that I think we should talk about. One is that this plan allows for, I believe, an additional 1 or 2 segments of bike share, which is obviously something that I've been pushing for, and that I hope that the community is continuing to ask for. The next part is that it's just so hot. It's so hot. And even if there are trees here with all 5, there's no way that we still stand next to the tree. I mean, this is still easily accessible space. And it's something that we can change. We already have, I feel like if we get these trees in the ground, we'll have a pipeline if we want to put benches, if we want to find additional funds to put a fountain or whatever the community wants. But right now, the immediate need is this summer, it's going to be hot, and there better be trees there. So thank you so much for moving forward with this. I look forward to the committee passing this and the full commission passing this, and hopefully we can get this trees in the ground as soon as possible, or I guess not as soon as possible, in April, whenever they're putting things in the ground. So thank you so much.
Sure. Other commissioners? Other members of the community?
If I can add one more thing, Zach, the other benefits of moving the bike share station, if you're familiar with that space, there's kind of a dead zone behind the racks where the ATM is, and it becomes a hangout for people who are, I don't know, hanging out. Their kind of crap gets piled up. It gets messy. It makes it feel a little less safe to use that ATM there. So moving that out of the way would kind of open up that part of the plaza just for more, general pedestrian use. And also having the bike share station running along the side of Columbia Road helps to prevent people crossing at the wrong space. and we think makes that a little safer crossing.
Yeah, there was definitely at least one sleeping bag behind the bike share when I went through this afternoon to take a look at the cherry blossom statue. So, I think that as well, by moving that bike share rack, you could, if we had a small concert, right, set the band or the performers back in that space, and then they wouldn't even need to be on what's seen here as the squares. And creating even more space.
Sure. I mean, we'd have to take a look at the map. It's possible a little bit of that is part of belongs to the buildings there. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of room that's being eaten up, not very efficiently by the bike share station.
Okay. Any members of the community have thoughts on this plan? Let's see. Oh, yes, Commissioner Faulkner, excuse me.
Yeah, I just was certainly curious to hear if any community members had thoughts, but I just wanted to say I'm certainly not as well versed in the history of the feedback and the back and forth on this. But I will say I think I have heard from folks that about just like, oh, it'd be great to have trees there, or it'd be great to have something there. And I know Commissioner Zatoli, who was previously in this seat, had people express that to him as well. So I'm certainly very supportive of getting trees there. And, I think it seems like this plan would still make the plaza usable for other things and make it a lot more comfortable for everyone. So.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I was just lost in something. I think that given I'll give community members another minute to raise hands, but I think you're absolutely right. Is what I've heard from people is the need for some sort of shading there, and I mean, I would prefer trees. I know the Adams Morgan Vision Plan sort of thought about trees as well as a retractable tarp, if a shade tarp. I don't know if we're going to go that far. Certainly, we're not going to go that far in this conversation. But just things to think about is in big open areas, it's nice to have shade. Dennis, go ahead. *6.
Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I had some issues with the plan in the first place, and I still have similar issues. I would like there to be shade there. The one drawing that shows what I guess would be a mature tree, with the 5 trees shown, it doesn't look like it's going to provide a whole lot of shade. If that's the amount of shade in that oval shape, doesn't look very productive. I would prefer a couple of real shade trees, elms or oaks, that could be arranged in a slightly different location to not interfere with pedestrian pathways, which I don't think this image that's up right now, I don't think coming along Adams Mill is particularly problematic with these new trees. But if you're coming across Columbia, Adams Mill from Columbia, or whatever, going towards Safeway, then you're shrinking down the pedestrian passageway, plus putting the bikes there. The bike is approximately, plus the station is probably close to 6 feet, and then when you back it out, then you're interfering with the pedestrian passageway. I think the bike station is just fine where it is. I think the idea of people crossing there and being protected by the bike rack is kind of ludicrous, really. I can't imagine too many people doing that. When people cross there, I've crossed there thousands and thousands of times. You walk in the crosswalk. So, all for some more shade, just a few real trees, and leave the bike rack where it is. Leave the pedestrian passageway there. then I think there would still be more open space for the various events, which mainly the bid likes to host there. And, you know, it doesn't belong to the bid. This is public space. So I think the public needs to be heard more than the bid does on this. Thank you very much.
Thanks for those comments. Brian, do you happen to know off the top of your head, or maybe Commissioner Bowles, because that's your SMD, the width of the sidewalk there, where the I guess where the ATM is for the BB&T, and to the right of the BB&T entrance. So with a bike share station there, you know, what is the sidewalk right of way?
I don't have that number handy. It's substantially wider, I suspect, than most of Columbia Road going up that way, except in front of the Safeway, it's pretty wide. But it's fairly wide here. This is a pretty wide sidewalk.
Yeah, and we could definitely get like that measurement, but that was not my concern. I don't think that's a concern in part of this. But yeah, Gordon says 20 feet at BB&T.
Right, and so if you were to remove, let's say 6 feet or even 10 feet for a bike share station and a bike, which I think is a generous give, there's still 10 feet there. And in my experience using bike share, I don't just pull a bike out willy-nilly without looking what's behind me. I recognize the challenge that can come from being in a crowded area, but I personally like the idea of a larger rack. I have a different experience at this corner, watching plenty of people run across the street, not necessarily in the crosswalk and not necessarily at the light. So I think that barrier, you know, it's less important to me as a barrier, but I think the opportunity to grow that station would be great. Other commissioner comments?
I will say that I don't see this as like a vessel for the bid. This is something that I requested. I asked to work with the bid, and it's something that residents have asked me multiple times. So I don't see that. I'm glad that, to me, this isn't like a bid-led thing. This is like they were able to do all the legwork, and I'm glad that we are working in partnership, because we, as the ANC, are hopefully voting on it right now.
All right, let's hear from friends of the Adams Morgan Library about this issue. I think you need to unmute yourself. Okay, well, I think it already being past 9 o'clock, you know, I want to have a fuller discussion on this. Oh, let's see. Cesar, go ahead.
Hi,
Oh, you have, I think you have 2 computers on at once.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was trying to bring attention to the Adams Morgan vision plan, because it called for a few of things aside from the trees. There was like lighting for evenings. There was shading devices. They brought up additional shading devices besides the trees. And there was just like some seating. I don't know. I just think it would be helpful to review the vision plan before we like kind of make a final decision on the plan.
So that's a great comment. I don't know, Brian, if you want to talk about, if you originally went to DDOT on this, maybe you have some insight into this. I will say personally, I think that enacting the vision plan is a larger conversation, right? Because, excuse me, it included permanent seating, I think the lights would be nice. More light is always better. But I think there may be questions as well as stringing those lights along the building that might be privately owned. Again, I think by putting these trees here, it creates a shaded area without. I think the benches sort of created a purposeful space for performances or for the arts. And I'm all for having performances in the arts, but I think having permanent structures in there changes the space more permanently than trees do, if that makes sense.
Sure, sure.
That's my thought on that. I don't know if other commissioners have put thoughts into the Adams Morgan Vision Plan from a number of years ago. Hearing none. Okay, so we also a note from Commissioner Bowles that simply the DC government doesn't have the funding for those bigger pieces. And we did, again, a year ago, have that discussion with DDOT about DDOT does have the money for plantings. And I think getting that planting, getting that shade in is pretty important. You know, we don't have a resolution on the table now, but I do want to move to place this item, the planting of trees at the BB&T Plaza, on the full ANC agenda without a recommendation from the PZT. Do I have approval from the committee to do that?
I second that. Yeah.
Second is good. Let's vote on that. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, so this we will put this on the full ANC agenda for the first week of April without a recommendation for PZT. And in the meantime, I will put together the language for a resolution. I'll stop sharing my screen now. With that, this has been a really constructive meeting. I thank you all for joining us. And I look forward to speaking with you all again in April.